I invite us to stand as we hear the gospel for today, which is from St. Luke, the 12th chapter. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?" Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." The Gospel of the Lord. I have been listening to Terry Pratchett's first novel, The Color of Magic, as an audiobook, and there's this great scene in the middle of it where the main character, who is a really bad magician who's giving a tour, he's giving a tour to the first tourist of Ankh-Morpork, the town in which they live, and they're walking through this public area, and the magician encounters Death. And Death gets out kind of like this notebook and is he's like, "Rincewind, I'm supposed to meet you tonight, but it's 600 miles away in this other town. You wouldn't mind just dying here on the spot instead of having to wait until later, because I'm going to have to travel quite a distance to get to this other." Anyway, I could not think of that story in relationship to this thing that God says to the guy. The guy's just having this nice moment. He's like, "Soul." I say to myself, "Soul," and then God is like, "You fool." It's quite a little story that Jesus tells here. And kind of the issue with this particular parable is what's it about? How are we supposed to think about it in our lives? I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and if you look out the front window of our house in Iowa, where I grew up, there's across the field and to the east a little bit what we call the North Place, because the North Place is where all the bins are. It's where the drying setup is, and then all the bins for the grain. And we have a very large farm. So when you go to the North Place, you see a thing that looks a lot like what's described in this sentence. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. Over the course of my lifetime, I've seen our family pull down many barns and build larger ones. They can store grain now for about 1,500 to 2,000 acres worth of corn and soybeans, and farm much more than that. They just take a lot of it to the river right away. And so sometimes when I've heard this story, and it's so focused on crops, of course I can't not think about our own context, But also, I think there's a big risk in this story of staying with the crops and the bins narrative when the majority of people have no experience of that at all. So we kind of will target like people who are in that storage and market economy as if they're the ones to be targeted by this parable. But what's at question is, what does it mean and why do you store up things, right? So if you continue with the crops and the storage facilities thing as just an example, the Mississippi River is not ready to receive all the grain that gets harvested in the fall from Iowa and Illinois and Wisconsin and Minnesota and whatever. And if all these farmers hadn't built all these grain sites, and if there weren't all the cooperatives and all the little towns up and down the Mississippi River to store all the grain, they couldn't receive all of it. There's just not enough barges, So you literally, for all of us to be able to have anything that's made out of corn or soybean, we have to have a whole system. But it's those very systems around us that can sometimes illustrate the vast disparity between wealth and poverty. Example, when I was in Phoenix this past week, downtown Phoenix has this massive convention center that we met in. There are these very tall hotels that anybody staying at the hotel has a key to a room for. There are self-driving cars driving around, with the little spinner things. I don't know if anybody's seen these yet. They were a total novelty to me. I had not seen them until I went to downtown Phoenix, but apparently they're all over big downtowns now. So there's these cars driving around without drivers, and there's, all the nice bars and restaurants and all that. And at the same time, Phoenix is really struggling with the unsheltered population. And so there were dozens of people sleeping on the streets in the middle of the day when it's 110 degrees. I don't even know how people are not dying in that situation. And so you see this, and you can't help but think that those hotels probably have enough rooms to spare. That's not the way market systems really work. Just to be really frank, if you're staying in a hotel, do you want to be on the same floor as somebody who came in off the street? I could just about imagine what that's like if they were to do that. So they won't, of course, do that. And the owners of hotels and those staying in them probably say to themselves, soul. And then when you walk down the street and you don't know how to help somebody in particular who's there on the street, you hear that little echo in the back of your head, you fool. And so what the parable is doing is it's trying to get us to think about how we're all actually so easily complicit in rationalizing these different kinds of systems. And we're not calling to mind as regularly as we could this very basic thing, which Jesus repeats quite a bit in his teaching. It's the apocalyptic motif that kind of makes its way all the way through Jesus' teachings about, there's no easier way to say it than now. The existential moment, now. Your life could be demanded of you now. And Jesus does that in a lot of different ways. But here, it says it really simply, this very night, your life is being demanded of you. You could die in your sleep tonight, you could. This is what Jesus is doing and saying. And so he's inviting us into this thing, which is actually a really good reminder on a very basic level, are you thinking enough about your own death that you're doing the things that actually have you prepared to help those around you if you did die? Have you done estate planning? Have you given the passwords to your family members for the things that are the most important? Like all these kinds of considerations that come up if you actually are reminded that it's very possible that you could die anytime. That's one thing that's going on there. But what's actually being done, and this is the deeper part for why Jesus is teaching this, is there is an ethics intrinsic to the existentialism of the now that's different from other ethics. You live differently when you keep in mind that you could die at any time. You do. And so much around us is essentially kind of like shaped around the assumption that you won't. You get up in the morning and on your phone, one of the things that you have scheduled on your phone, probably, I know it's on mine, I think it naturally comes up there, is the markets, right? Like every day you get a report on how the Dow Jones is doing and the NASDAQ and the S&P 500. And so those are the things you might think about quite early in the day. And I've never seen a little, whatever you call the thing on your phone that gathers information like this. What is that called? Not an app, but a widget? There's no widget that pops up at the top that says, your odds of having died last night are... Right? What the market does is it teaches you that over time you can really build wealth by investing your wealth, and that these systems that are in place around you, if you can get to be a participant in them, that's the best way to get rich. The best way to get rich is to already be rich. And you can take advantage of all those systems. And you could die tonight. And then what does all that wealth do for you? Okay, so that's what's going on. It starts with this request from someone. I love this. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, because nobody has ever asked this before, ever, right? To make sure that the inheritance is distributed appropriately. Someone in the crowd says to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." And Jesus very quickly exits from that position. I'm not going to be the one to do that. The Bible's pretty clear about this. If you can, you ought to work stuff out with other people on your own. But if you can't work it out at all, engage a lawyer, and then good luck. And then he goes sideways of that altogether and reminds the listener, so the someone in the crowd who wants the family inheritance divided with the brother, he reminds this listener, you could die tonight. And then ends with this sentence. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. So what's it mean to be rich toward God? Maybe we need a widget for this that tracks how rich you are being towards God. What does that one look like? What does it mean to be rich toward God? What does it mean to be rich toward God? I sometimes see this in people. We have examples, I think you do too, when you notice that somebody is being remarkably rich toward God. I think you actually know. The reason that everybody's reluctant to name those stories or to give those examples is because they're immediately thinking underneath the surface or asking themselves whether they have been doing any of the things like the ones that we know are actually good examples of the people who are doing it. And so then you're like, oh crap, so if I was going to be rich toward God, I would have to be something like that, right? And so it's difficult. And then the people who are truly rich towards God are often so humble or unknowing about it that they don't even know it about themselves. And even if they did know it about themselves, are very unlikely to say it about themselves. This is kind of one of the remarkable things about the most saintly people, is that they don't. And there's also a whole dimension of the being rich toward God that literally, it's not even that sometimes people are aware and they won't talk about it, but it's literally the case that part of the mystery of being rich toward God is that it's so mysterious, that it kind of emerges among people, this natural kind of outpouring that you'll see in yourself or others, where you're you were kind of astounded that you did that. And some people who are in certain situations are more rich toward God by nature of the situation they're in. It's like those studies that consistently show that the poor give more away than the rich do as a percentage of what they have. There's something about the situation of being poor that makes you more aware of the need and proximate to the need, so that you're actually more able to be saintly, I guess you could say, if you're poor, which is why Jesus quite frequently told people to be poor if they wanted to follow him, right? Because you know. And that's true not just of poverty, but a lot of other things, that somehow the social situation you're in can sometimes shape your capacity to be rich toward God. So that's all going on in this text. And so when we get done reading it, and especially if we get done meditating on it in the way that I've just invited us to do, I'm assuming at this point, if I have talked about this in any way that's fruitful for you, you're internally maybe narrating a few things to yourself, and you're also feeling this inarticulate kind of sense of not knowing how to think or talk about this. I love the fact that this text has these two sentences, or I guess they're not sentences, they're exclamations. These are very useful. So if you leave today and you're thinking about this for yourself, what does it mean for me to be rich toward God? Or what does it mean for us to be rich toward God? Or if you want to keep it third person for a while yet, you can be like, what does it mean to be rich toward God? These two little exclamations are actually quite useful. So you go home, you're asking yourself, how could I be rich toward God? One exclamation that's very useful, actually, and I love it, is, soul, and you can examine, in this case, the soul sentence is stated out of comfort. Like, all right, I got my savings. But that's very real, isn't it? I mean, if you went to your retirement account today and you were 65 years old and your retirement account said $2 million, there's a good number of people who, seeing that, would then say to themselves, soul. There's a few people who have been living so large that when it said $2 million and they were 65, they would be like, oh crap, I don't know if I can make it to 85 on that or not. But a lot of people would be like, soul, right? So, I mean, these are very real, and not all of them are necessarily bad. You pay off your car, you pay off your mortgage, soul, right? But the negative is you could pay off your house today and die tonight, Jesus points out. So the other exclamation, that it's fine to aim toward yourself periodically, I think, as long as you're not too hard on yourself, is the one that Jesus says, you fool. Which is really just you're fooling yourself, right? If you're making these kinds of like plans and doing these kinds of things and thinking these kinds of ways and not really considering the ethical crisis of the now, that now your life might be demanded of you. So one thing you can do is you can use those. What does it mean for me to be rich toward God? What does it mean to be rich toward God? And you can be like, you start thinking about a thing in your life, and you can say, soul, or you can say, you fool. But there's one more thing. Jesus is clear that you could die tonight, but he's also clear about one other thing. And this is way cool, if you're willing to accept it. You don't have to wait and die tonight. If you would like to, like death confronting Rincewind in Ankh-Bamork, 600 miles from where he's supposed to die, you could die now. To all this stuff. Or, even more interestingly, you could remind yourself, I have already died. Which is what we say in baptism. That you have already died, been drowned with Christ in the waters of baptism, so that you may live. So the most radical existential opportunity Jesus is presenting in this teaching, because it's part of this larger body of things that he talked about and gave example of, is it's pretty clear that part of the reason Jesus had only very sporadic existential dread about his own death is because he lived all the time as if he had already died. And his life wasn't his. His life was God's. His life was others. So, if you go into the world later today and you ask yourself, what does it mean for me to be rich toward God? Another move you can make, I recommend it. Yeah, you can go soul, or you could go you fool, or you could go I am. I am. Amen.